and gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation on all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. For you, O God, you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So we've worked our way through Advent. We started with preparing, and we had prepared our sanctuary for Advent. We talked about preparing for what it means for Christ to be born. My guess is you've done some preparations before today. Is my guess. Well, you still have the rest of today and part of tomorrow to finish your preparations, if they're going to get finished before Christmas. We talked about listening to hear what it is that God would speak into our lives, to hear how God may speak even in the most unexpected ways. And then we talked about watching to see what it is that God might be doing to break into our lives yet again. And so this day, as we are so close to Christmas, we are simply about the business of waiting. And waiting is hard work. I don't know about you, but it is very difficult to wait, especially if you are prepared and you have been listening and watching. It is very difficult then for us to wait. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in this text. Most of us are familiar with this passage from Micah, and then there's that other one, right? You know the other passage, what does the Lord require of you? And these are the two passages that most of us know from Micah. Micah is a very short book. If you read all of it, you will wonder who wrote those two passages that we remember, because Micah is actually a very cranky prophet. And he's very graphic in his writing. He is one of those prophets that calls things the way he sees them, and he does not mince words. There is not much good going on in the background of this story. It is around the 8th century before Christ was born. There is great unrest and turmoil, especially in the northern kingdom, but as well in Jerusalem. The Assyrian forces are threatening. There is much anxiety and consternation in the air. And that's not all. The prophet is, on behalf of God, the prophet is very annoyed at the social and moral abuses that he sees in the society. The powerful had taken lands and inheritances from the poor. They had evicted widows from their homes. They'd fixed scales and weights so that they could cheat the customers. They'd taken bribes. They were worshiping other gods, especially Baal. And the religious leaders were no better. The religious leaders and the prophets of the day were all very self-serving. Micah goes on to declare the ruin of the great city. And this sets us up for this passage. And so he's sharing with them all the things that are wrong, all the things that are terrible, all that they are experiencing. And then he says to them, "But you, O Bethlehem of Ephrathah, who are one of the little clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to rule in Israel, whose origin is from of old, from ancient days." We get this great word of hope, this word of assurance, offered in love, signaling peace. He closes it by saying, "The one who shall come will be the one of peace. The people will live secure, and the name of God will be great." And so now they have to wait. So how do you wait in the middle of all of that is going on around you? How do you wait in the midst of hunger that is everywhere? where the economy is tilted towards the powerful, where people are worshiping whatever shows up in front of them that might give them relief, when those who are in leadership are more concerned with themselves. This is the situation of the people as the prophet tells them to wait, for one is coming. Now, I don't know about you, but I think it's really hard to wait when it feels like everything's coming off the rails. However, it's possible. I want to invite you to listen to this brief clip. So the title of this piece is The Most Beautiful Time of Life. Can you just imagine what you must have been feeling to write such a happy piece? I mean, seriously, didn't you want to kind of get up and go ahead and do that foxtrot, right? I mean, it's just a joy-filled piece. That manuscript that you saw on the screen was actually found in the archives at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and Museum. It was found by a music theory professor from the University of Michigan named Patricia Hall. And she found all of these manuscripts of music that had been arranged and performed by the prisoners in the Nazi death camps. Now, in the midst of that situation, in the midst of that horror, as they are waiting, this beautiful, beautiful piece of music erupts. It doesn't matter what is going on around us. The promise that God gives us is God will break into our lives. God will redeem. God will reconcile. God will renew. Friends, this is what we do during Advent, is we wait and we watch and we listen and we get ready for all the ways that God does indeed show up. And it doesn't just happen there, it has happened here. I want to share a couple of stories with you. The first one happened just last Sunday. I know this is going to sound like the Twilight Zone, but I went to church today, a church I've never been to. It's the church my neighbors urged me to go because they were having a Christmas carol service. I'm sorry, I know it's a cantata. Church is Methodist, and although it was full to capacity, I recognized no one. Many knew my neighbors. I was introduced to a lot of people. But at one point in the service, the pastor indicated that we should all greet and wish well our neighbors. Okay, I do tell you to bless each other, but it's okay. And since he already knew the neighbors seated around him, he turned to the woman who was seated directly in front of him. And when she turned around, they both looked at each other and said, "I know you." "Where do I know you from? H-E-B? "Yes, I know you from H-E-B. "Well, I'm so-and-so's husband." She's like, "Oh my gosh, I know you." See, he had lost his wife in October when she had worked at H-E-B. And this was one of her closest friends from H-E-B. And they just happened to be sitting together in worship. Now, that may not sound like a big deal to you, but that was a huge deal for both of them. It was God's way of saying, it's going to be okay. I am with you. I will bring you comfort. I will be with you. And then just this last week, on Thursday, we had our Blue Christmas service, and one of the families in attendance said, "I can't tell you how much we appreciated this service. It was so helpful to go to a holiday service that really allowed us to openly acknowledge the pain of Mom's absence." I wanted to send this email to thank you and your staff for arranging the service, and then she went on to say, "And we appreciated all the small touches, even the friendly face with a flashlight guiding us to the steps of the church that evening." See, we're not waiting idly. We don't sit and wait for God to do everything. We are invited to be a part of what God has invited us to do. And even in this season of waiting for God to take care of all the whatever turmoil we may feel like we are in, we are called to live as if. And so as we move into Christmas, as we allow ourselves to remember yet again the birth of the Christ child, and you'll recall that the reason this particular reading always shows up at Christmas is because we've kind of appropriated it. We've kind of said, well, Micah must have been talking about Jesus. But hopefully by now you've figured out that Jesus shows up over and over and over again. We have the story of the birth that we celebrate, but I promise you, God continues to be born again into our lives in ways that are surprising and unexpected. And so while we will celebrate that birth from over 2,000 years ago, we know that God will indeed show up again in an unexpected way. And so our calling is to not only wait, but to be engaged in what God calls us to do while we wait. May we be a people who can wait actively and filled with hope. Because I promise you, God will show up, and it will be very unexpected. Thanks be to God.